Hello, everybody, and welcome into the recruiting rundown here on Gamecock Central. Kendall Smith, Wes Mitchell, coming at you on Thanksgiving Eve. Happy early Thanksgiving to each and every one of you. But not only that, we are a week out from National Signing Day. It's the early signing period, but we call it National Signing Day here on Gamecock Central because it's just more common now that guys sign early, and that is on December 4th this year, a week away, Wes. How is South Carolina feeling with National Signing Day 7 days away?
Yeah, Kendall, I think they're feeling good right now. I think they'll be feeling great in about a week if they get good news on, a handful of these guys we're going to talk about here shortly. Lots of guys making their decisions, or you would say maybe have made decisions, but are going to make those final decisions. We've been talking about it on these rundowns really quite often. How many guys have we said, well, this guy's committed somewhere, but South Carolina's trying to push for him. Other schools are trying to push for him. So a lot of these guys are going to make those final decisions coming up. Now, this is not going to be a comprehensive list. I want to make sure that's clear to everybody listening or watching. Go check out GamecockCentral.com where you're going to get a more complete list on the prospects that South Carolina is still, of course, chasing. And Kendall, of course, you're going to get those behind-the-scenes looks. And, of course, if somebody does commit, you'll get that scoop on exactly how they fit in at South Carolina as well.
Yes, National Signing Day is like the Super Bowl for Wes Mitchell and Chris Clark. So they will have you up to date with everything that you need to know in the world of recruiting next week and, of course, leading up to it as well. But you mentioned it, Wes. We want to get into some specifics here on the recruiting rundown today. Some guys that are not committed to South Carolina that have either visited or they're considering a flip or whatever it might be. And this is coming right off of our last recruiting rundown last week, which was about South Carolina's game against Wofford, the last real chance for the Gamecocks to impress recruiting prospects this season with a home game. And a guy that was at that game, Christian Ingram, he's a 3-star defensive lineman from the state of Georgia. And he's got a few schools that he's considering right now. So after that visit, where do things stand with him for South Carolina leading into National Early Signing Day?
Yeah, like you said, a few guys came in. Quay Dodd already committed to Carolina. He was one of them. Stephen Miller, another. And Christian Ingram, the guy among the two uncommitted that I think South Carolina has the best shot at. And right now, as you mentioned, some other schools still involved. He's one of the few guys we're going to talk about who's not committed anywhere else. And currently considering South Carolina, obviously, Kentucky, Michigan, Vanderbilt, and Southern Cal. Now, the two new things to know here is that I think going into this visit, Kentucky was probably the favorite. I think coming out of this visit, South Carolina probably currently should feel the best about where they stand. And then a little interesting twist, he is going to be at Southern Cal this weekend for his official visit there, a program and a game that Carolina fans should be watching as they face Notre Dame for other reasons. But in terms of recruiting-wise, the Gamecocks, of course, hope he doesn't have too much fun out there. South Carolina currently, again, I believe in the best position with him as we sit here today on Wednesday, but still plenty to kind of get to the finish line there with Christian Ingram, who's been a little bit of a late in the process target for the Gamecocks.
Yeah, South Carolina needing for Southern Cal to win its game against Notre Dame this week. But again, like you said, make sure that Christian Ingram doesn't have too much fun out there because, of course, the Gamecocks want him to come to South Carolina. You talked about some guys that are already committed that South Carolina is trying to flip here as we get towards National Signing Day on December 4th. One of those guys, Jared Smith, 4-star edge from Alabama. He's committed to Auburn. Do you think South Carolina can pull it off, Wes?
Well, and Kendall, I think if Ingram is kind of a newer guy, Jared Smith is someone that's on the other end of that spectrum. Carolina fans have heard that name really the entire recruiting process. He's been on campus many, many times. Great relationship with Sterling Lucas. And, I could make a call right now on where I think he's headed, but honestly, I think it could change before this video even goes up because so many schools are just trying so hard at the end. You, of course, have Auburn. You, of course, have South Carolina. You have Ole Miss pushing to try to get him on campus this weekend as well. So it's kind of a 3-team race for Jared Smith down to the finish line, Kendall. I think coming off of that Missouri game, Carolina felt pretty good about where they stand. Now, he was back at Auburn this past weekend and saw probably one of the best football games of the entire college football season in that, triple overtime masterpiece that Auburn won against A&M. And, we'll see if he's anywhere this coming weekend. So I think both sides, all sides really, are still jockeying for position there. South Carolina will, of course, play it out to the end. Percentage-wise, maybe a little edge to Auburn here, but that's more because, hey, he's still committed. He's still visiting them. I'm sure had a great experience this past weekend, but the Gamecocks still going to do everything in their power to fight to the very end for Jared Smith.
Well, another guy that South Carolina is currently trying to flip is Kevin Wynn. He's a 4-star defensive lineman from Georgia. He's committed to Florida State. South Carolina in a good position with this one. But Wes, same thing here. What are the chances that South Carolina can flip Wynn from Florida State?
Yeah, so they did get Kevin Wynn back on campus unofficially this past weekend. The thing to watch here with Wynn, and this is, I feel like a trend with all these other guys. We were talking about, hey, that was South Carolina's last opportunity to get guys in for games. Well, some teams still have home games this weekend. Some teams have Friday home games. So some prospects will maybe go to one school on Friday, another school on Saturday. And from what we're hearing, both Georgia and Florida State are trying to get him in for 2 games. So Georgia Tech is on Friday. Georgia's trying to get him into that game. Florida State trying to get him in on Saturday. So for all 3 of those schools, I think they're all 3 in it. Florida State has the advantage of being the school that has been in it the longest and has had him committed. And of course, Georgia, the home state school there, although they've recruited a lot of defensive tackles over the last couple of years. And then of course, South Carolina, who has a great need at that position and a great, I would say, situation to sell to him. So much like Jared Smith, I'm not trying to avoid the question, Kendall, but I just think there are multiple ways this thing could go. And this is why you follow recruiting, because this thing could shift multiple times between now and signing day. I think the Gamecocks in it, but not to the finish line yet. And a guy we didn't have on our list to talk about, Kendall, but I did want to mention just briefly, also in the conversation in terms of committed elsewhere, but Carolina trying to flip, Mike Tyler here locally at Hammond. We've talked about him before, but real quick, I think the Gamecocks are in great shape there to ultimately land him. He's going to have a signing ceremony at Hammond on signing day, and I feel really good about South Carolina's chances to ultimately get that signature with Mike Tyler. Those other ones we're talking about right now, just a little bit more up in the air in terms of where Carolina stands.
Well, good news there with Tyler, and the other good news is that South Carolina is in it with these other prospects, which is huge as you get towards the finish line, as you mentioned there, Wes. But there's another guy we've got to talk about, and we've talked about him for quite some time as well. He's a local guy from Irmo, Donovan Murph, 4-star wide receiver. He made it to Clemson last weekend. He's been to South Carolina a ton as well. This is a battle all the way until the end for a local talent in the state of South Carolina. And obviously, with South Carolina playing Clemson this weekend, even bigger stakes go into that as well. So with Donovan Murph, how do you feel like his recruiting journey is shaping out, and where does South Carolina stand in it?
Yeah, this one's a true in-state battle, and the one difference with Murph compared to these other guys is he is actually going to announce his decision at a national all-star game at the beginning of January. So we won't even find out where he's going in a week. I'll be curious to see. A lot of times guys will do the secret sign, which is they'll go ahead and sign with the school of choice on Wednesday and then just announce it to the college football world at those all-star games. So I don't know if that's his plan yet or if he will just wait. He's not an early enrollee because he's already reclassified, of course, from 2026 to 2025. So he will be a summer enrollee as opposed to a mid-year enrollee. So either way would be fine for him. It is South Carolina or Clemson at this point. In a big picture standpoint, Alabama was also involved, but it's kind of come down to the 2 in-states. He did have a good time. He did give great feedback on that Clemson visit. I still think South Carolina is in the best shape here with Murph and in a really good spot to land his pledge. For one, the relationship with Mike Furry. For 2, just these other in-state wide receivers. You look at Malik Clark, you look at Jordan Gidron, you look at some of the guys he has developed relationships with that are also going to Carolina. I think kind of that bond those guys already have is going to play a major role in his recruitment down the stretch. So, again, not to the finish line yet, but I would still, even after that Clemson visit, give South Carolina the edge here with Murph.
Well, so much happening in the world of recruiting, and this is a very exciting time. And as I said earlier, visit GamecockCentral.com. Follow us on social media at Gamecock Central because we will have all of the latest information about National Signing Day, about what's going on, about these recruits, about their decisions on all of those platforms. Wes, just overall from you, how do you feel heading into this signing day? Do you feel like South Carolina is in a good spot at this point?
Yeah, I do. And again, that's not a comprehensive list of guys who could be in the class. There are other prospects we've talked about, other prospects they're trying to land or flip. You know, 4-star defensive lineman Zay Hardy is another one we're continuing to track. 4-star corner Michael Clayton is someone we've been keeping an eye on. Demula Ejidahun, who's a 4-star offensive lineman they've been trying to flip from Georgia Tech. Lots of other guys we're still kind of keeping an eye on. So I would not just in this video and think, well, hey, that's the only guys to keep an eye on. There are even other guys to keep watch on if you're a Carolina fan. I think it's a good class. They're top 25 right now. I think they can turn it into a great class if they can land a few of these prospects down the stretch. And then, Kendall, that's not even getting into what comes next, which is transfer portal. So you really have a step-by-step process here, right? December 4th is kind of our now de facto National Signing Day. Fast forward to the beginning of that next week, December 9th. That is when the transfer portal window opens. So if you're Carolina, we know what they did in the portal last year. We know if you paid any attention on Senior Day this past weekend, you know how many just really big-time players are going to be leaving this team this offseason. So for Carolina, to me, it is equally important to have another great year in the transfer portal and continue what they did last year. And real quick, Kendall, I want to remind people, it doesn't necessarily mean you're getting 4 or 5-star guys out of the portal. Look at Kyle Kennard. Look at Demetrius Knight. Look at some of the guys. Look at Joshua Simon the last 2 years. It's more about picking the right guys than it is necessarily the most high-profile guys in the portal. That is something they have done an outstanding job of doing so far. Can they continue that this year? I think is going to be one of the biggest questions and one of the biggest just storylines to watch for Carolina on the recruiting trail as we kind of turn the page here soon from high school recruiting into that transfer portal window.
Well, and it speaks to the way that college football has evolved over the years. To be a successful program for the long term, you have to be willing to go into the transfer portal and you have to be willing to get the best possible options for your program. South Carolina has proven that they want to do that, and that's why the recruiting rundown will not stop anytime soon because, of course, we will keep you updated with everything happening in the high school recruiting world, but the transfer world as well as that ramps up here in just a couple of weeks. But Wes, thank you so much for joining me here on the recruiting rundown. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. We're just getting started. So much more to come your way. But again, happy Thanksgiving to all of you. Enjoy your week. Enjoy your weekend. A big one for South Carolina against Clemson. And we say it all the time. It's not just about what happens on the field, but it's what happens on the field that affects off the field as well, which is recruiting. So we will see you guys soon. Thanks for joining us.